Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate of St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Do You Know series question. As we continue our series on the history of the Mass, today's Do You Know question is, do you know how the Council of Trent impacted the Mass in response to the Reformation? It took a long time for the Church to respond to Luther and the movements of the Reformation, so much so that much of the damage was unrepairable. There are many reasons for why the Church took a long time to respond, but eventually it did. And in 1545, it called together the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent was an attempt to respond to all these calls for reform. And it actually lasted till 1563. Now, it's a long time, but there were actually three main sessions for the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1547, 1551 to 1552, and then 1562 to 1563. And the reason why it took so long is because there are many interruptions to the council due to plagues, famine, politics, etc. But eventually in 1563 the council ended, and it attempted during its long time that it existed, it attempted to respond to the calls for reform in two ways. One pastorally, the pastoral issues that impacted church life, and the other doctrinally, to clarify many of the doctrines that had been challenged by the reformers. In the terms of pastoral dimension, they did pay attention to a lot of the calls for reform, especially with regards to many of the abuses that existed in the church. For example, it called for a reduction of the masses for special intentions. It called for a reduction of the number of masses the priests could say in one single day. It also, mandated for the first time seminaries for the proper training of the clergy, and also insisted that bishops had to reside in their dioceses. They couldn't be absentee landlords of the diocese and so on. So many of these were pastoral reforms that the Trent actually initiated in response to the call for reforms from the reformers themselves. They also addressed many of the doctrinal issues. Now, with regards to the doctrinal issues, it becomes very important to really realize that there are many opinions out there. So Trent saw itself a need to clarify many of the doctrines that were being challenged by the reformers. The unfortunate thing with regards to the doctrinal piece is that oftentimes Trent reacted in a kind of a knee-jerk reaction to the reformers that essentially, they responded by saying, if the reformers wanted this, we're going to enshrine something just the opposite. And oftentimes there was a logic to it, but oftentimes there was also a negative response to the reformers as well, which sometimes did not help the situation. But just to give you a couple of examples, it insisted that the cup be reserved for the priest, whereas the reformers were calling for the cup to be distributed to the entire community as well as the bread. It insisted that the liturgy be dominated pretty much in the hands of the clergy and not in the hands of the people. Latin was to be the way the Mass was to be the official language of the liturgy, whereas the reformers were calling for language in the vernacular. And so, unfortunately, many of these changes did not help, in terms of attempting to restore unity, and rather they were negative responses to the reformers. But Trent focused primarily on the liturgy again, simply because the reformers were focused on the liturgy. So it brought in a number of changes that would impact the liturgy for centuries on. some of the changes that were brought in. First, it limited the number of particular masses that a priest could say on a particular day, as well as masses for special intentions. It reserved the cup exclusively for the priest, so that the community was not to participate in it, but is only the priest. The Mass was to be said in Latin, simply not in the vernacular as the Reformers wanted. So Latin became the official language of the Church with regards to the liturgy. They reaffirmed transubstantiation, the way the bread and wine becomes the body and blood of Christ, something that the Reformers kind of denied. They also reaffirmed the sacrificial nature of the Mass, which the Reformers also challenged and denied. They standardized the Mass, all primarily into the hands of the clergy, with the people being essentially reverent spectators, period, not much participation at all. The Missal and the Breviary were all established and reformed, but they were all in Latin and so on. The altar itself was put against the wall with the people, with the priest essentially celebrating Mass with his back to the people. There were low and high masses established with almost no participation on the part of the people. The devotions, things that people could participate in, became much more popular and much more conducive to prayer than Mass itself is. So it became even more devotions became even more popular than the Mass. And then the reform of the Missal, this time there were very clear directions in red ink, which became known as rubrics, and unfortunately these directions dominated the liturgy to such an extent that it became more a focus on the performance and the directions of how to say Mass instead of just celebrating the liturgy for what it was. So unfortunately Trent, as I said, brought a lot of clarity to the picture with regards to the doctrinal issues. Unfortunately, it kind of did not dialogue with the Reformers to respond to some of their call for reforms, and as a result kind of cemented this unity that lasted for over 400 years. And it set up a trajectory with regards to the liturgy, especially, but many other areas, but especially the liturgy, which became so focused on the ritual action without the participation of the people, that this kind of liturgy existed for over 400 years, so that the evening of the Second Vatican Council, we're still celebrating liturgy according to the Council of Trent and the Missal of the Council of Trent. And it's this kind of situation that will, over the next few centuries, we'll see other people calling for reforms of the liturgy, which ultimately will lead to Pope John the 23rd calling the Second Vatican Council in the year 1959. And so I hope this has helped a bit to explain just how the Council of Trent impacted the Mass in response to the Reformation. And I hope you will return again to more of the Uno Series question as we explore what the Mass looked like from the time of the Reformation, the Council of Trent, all the way to the Second Vatican Council. Thank you very much.